Hello, geniuses. If you are standing up, you might want to sit down, because what I'm about to show you is possibly the most incredible, amazing, and mind blowing chess position you have ever seen. And I don't think I'm exaggerating, this is truly incredible. First of all, this is a composition, it's not from a real game, every time I get asked that. And this was composed by the genius, the brilliant Alexei Troitsky, an incredible puzzle composer. So it is white to play and win. And at first glance, it might seem like it's pretty obvious, right? White has just an extra knight and a pretty advanced pawn. We can simply take and it's going to be easy to win. But it's actually not that simple. First of all, if black tries to stop the pawn going this way, this does not work. White can simply, for example, just pick up this pawn and everything works in white's favor. For example, if the black rook just tries to stop the pawn now, there is a fork here, picking up the rook and easily winning the game for white. And any other line after that doesn't work. But the first move is indeed d takes c6. We want to get this pawn closer to the promotion. It's just black's response that it's not optimal. Black has to try and check the white king. And now we already need to be a little bit careful, okay? Because if the king goes to g2, like it seems logical to do, well, actually, after the rook takes our rook and the king captures back, now the black king is in time to stop the white pawn. And it doesn't matter that we can try to defend it like this, for example. The king is still too close and it's going to just kick the knight out and then pick up the pawn. And this is going to be a draw. So after the black rook gives a check, actually the only move that still fights for the win here for white is king f2, giving up the rook completely. And I'm going to give this a brilliant mark because we are sacrificing a piece and it is the best move. Now, of course, black can simply take this rook and it is the best try by black. But what's important is that we are now covering the e-file with our king. And so it's not going to be easy for this rook to come back and stop the pawn. And we also have a tempo now, very importantly, to play e7. Now, before we move forward from this position, I will show you just something that a lot of people asked me about the first time I made a video about this, which is what happens after king e2, rook takes, and d7. And a lot of people were saying, well, you know, the rook still cannot pick up the pawn, and if it takes the knight, we simply promote. But here there is a very resourceful move by black in the form of rook h5. And now if we get the queen, there is rook to e5 check, defended by the pawn, meaning that this is still a drawn endgame. So, okay, we get here, check, we go up and the rook takes. What now? Well, we push. And as we just saw, the rook cannot take the knight because we're simply going to promote. And the rook cannot come back here. The only thing that the rook can try to do is give us checks. Now, if we ever try to move closer to the rook, now we're going to give the rook enough time to come to e2 and stop the pawn. And again, this is a draw. So, we cannot do that. And we cannot go to the e-file either. You might be thinking, well, we're still covering e2. But this doesn't work because of rook h5. Again, same thing. Right? So, we need to go up. King f3. That's the reason why we need to play this. We're still defending e2, and now there's no rook h5, because after we promote, this doesn't come with check, and we can just move the queen away. I don't know, here for example. And again, the rook cannot take the knight, meaning that the rook has to keep checking us. The king keeps going up. The rook checks, and the king goes up, and the rook checks. And now we get to a very important point, because finally the king can pick up this pawn. And now, rook h5 is never going to be a problem in the future. But of course, the rook can still check us, and we still have all of the same problems. And for example now, if we try to move to the e-file, even without the pawn on f6, there is going to be rook h1, or rook h2, I think works the same. And if we promote, this is a skewer, meaning that it's going to be a draw. So we still cannot do that. And we cannot come up because we lose the knight with check, and the rook picks up the last pawn. And we cannot come here because the rook simply comes behind the pawn. Okay, so what do we do? It doesn't seem like we have many moves. Well, the king has to come back down from where it came. And the rook checks, and we come down, and the rook checks, and we come down. And again, remember, if we ever step to the e-file, the rook is going to be able to pick up the pawn. If we ever step away into the g-file, again, the rook is going to come to the e-file. So check, but now, importantly, we can go to e2. Why? What has changed? Well, it is not possible to create the skewer. Up until this very point, if we had gone, for example, here, there was still the possibility to go with the skewer. Well, actually here we have king e2, but the concept is the same, right? So that's why we had to go down, king e2. And now, well, what can black do? It keeps giving us checks. And we do not go back up, okay? We didn't go king e2 for no reason. The king was aiming for the other side of the board, king e3. The same thing applies. Black has to keep giving us checks. And now, the king wants to keep going up. Rook check, king up, rook check, and king up, rook check. And we get to a very similar position to the one that we had a few moves earlier. What has changed from this position? Well, let's have a look. We have access to a new move now. No, it's not king d7, because now the pawn is pinned to the king. And it is not stepping to the e-file because of this rook skewer. No, we have the brilliant knight f6. And this gets another brilliant mark. It's a full knight sacrifice, and it's the whole reason why we had this knight placed on h7 by the composer. Now, of course, black has to do something about this, because now there are no more checks apart from taking the knight. If the rook tries to go up to h8 and stop the pawn, a move that a lot of you suggested, well, actually now we have knight d7 check, the king moves, and knight f8, blocking the view of the rook. Meaning that the rook will have to try and check us, but now after king d7, there's simply no way to stop the pawn. Even if the rook tries to pin the pawn, well, now the knight can take the rook. Quite incredible. But wait a second. We said that the rook can simply take the knight. What's the purpose of this check? Of this sacrifice? Well, you see, we got the rook in a position from where it can never stop the pawn from the 8th rank. It used to be the case that rook h8 was a problem. But now, rook f8 never is. Because we're simply going to take the rook and promote. And I actually kind of spoiled the solution here. We cannot go up because the rook pins the pawn. We cannot go here because of the skewer. So the king has to go down. For the third time in this incredible puzzle, the king and rook start this dance. And the king reaches e2 once again. And the rook is out of checks. It cannot stop the pawn from f8. It cannot check the king. It cannot create a skewer. So it will have to play some random move. And now the queen simply promotes. And although quite tricky, queen for a rook is a win in the hands of someone that knows what they're doing. And this is, in my opinion, one of the most incredible chess positions ever created. What a composition. Simply incredible. If you enjoy this type of videos, let me know. I will try to do some more. I usually make shorts about these puzzles, but some of them just require an entire video, like this one. Thank you so much to my friend Thivan for sending me this puzzle. I don't know if I would ever found it without him. And don't forget to subscribe, leave a like, and if you still have some doubts about this position, please let me know. And I'll see you next time.